Welcome back, everybody, to another exciting edition of Western Civilization. Today, we are going to look at the Hellenistic world, and this will cover the years 323 to 31 BC. So grab a pen and paper, a tablet, or a keyboard, and let's get going. By the end of this lecture, you will be able to explain how the Hellenistic world was shaped by Alexander's conquests and successor kingdoms, analyze the economic, political, and social transformations of the Hellenistic world, including the rise of cosmopolitan cities, assess the impact of Hellenistic cultural achievements in science, philosophy, religion, and arts, as well as shifts in identity and civic life. Finally, you'll be able to understand how Hellenization influenced Rome's institutions, culture, and expansion across the Mediterranean. In our last lecture, we saw how Alexander had completely transformed the Greek world. His father had conquered Greece, and then Alexander had gone out and conquered a vast empire for himself, leaving no successors. We saw how Greek culture began to spread and began to also interact with Eastern cultures. Another major theme of our last lecture was the collapse of the polis system. This was no longer going to be the dominant political system, but instead we were going to be in a world of monarchies, and the idea of the Greek assembly, the Greek citizen, had died. Along with it had died the idea of the citizen soldier who protected his homeland, protected his polis, and we saw the transition to professionalized armies who are now going to fight for pay. In this upcoming section, we're going to see the world that's left behind by the collapse of Alexander's empire now. This is really the world of the successor kingdoms. Those generals, those companions of Alexander who fought over his what was left of his empire. A big focus will be on the spread of Greek culture across the Eastern world as it mixes with local traditions, creating this new hybrid culture. We'll see new ideas in government, trade, philosophy, and new identities emerge, but also some new challenges. Finally, we'll end with a nod to the new and rising power in the West that will come to challenge and dominate these Hellenistic kingdoms. Okay. So the new political order. I briefly talked about the successors to Alexander. Alexander dies without a viable successor of his own. And so the next period, really the next 30 years or so, is going to be a period of intense warfare between Alexander's companions. And they're fighting to become the next Alexander, but none of them are strong enough to do so. None emerges as the power broker that's going to unite Alexander's old empire. And so, as I mentioned, we have the Ptolemies. They're going to be a major player. These are going to be in the area around Egypt, one of the richest parts of the Near East. The biggest lion's share is going to go to Seleucus, the Seleucid Empire. And this is going to really be a blend of Greek and Persian style rule here, the old Persian heartland. And then the Antagonids, and this map probably does them a favor because they actually really just end up mostly in Macedon. They can dominate Greece, but in Macedon. But really, they're going to be smaller and weaker of the three. And they're going to, they're going to have to deal with the Greeks, so they have to face continuous uprisings. Now, again, it's important to emphasize city-states are kaput. Doesn't matter if it's in Greece, it doesn't matter if it's in the Near East, they are ruled by monarchs. And so the Greeks have to get used to becoming subjects and not citizens. A big transformation, and this is a really important part of the Hellenistic Age, is the transformation of the economy. And there's a couple of things that I should mention on this front, is these kings, whether they're in Egypt or whether they're in Persia, they're inheriting this river valley tradition. And it's important to just to reacquaint ourselves with this. River valleys are super rich, right? They have all this agricultural land that's well watered. Egypt, for instance, we know is incredibly bountiful. The Tigris and Euphrates Valley, incredibly bountiful. And we know the systems that are set up there, right? This tight, centralized rule of kings and temple elites. And these Hellenistic monarchs, they just step right into that role. Okay, so they step into this really hierarchical world of incredible wealth. Furthermore, the Hellenistic kings are going to keep key monopolies for themselves on key industries. And so one of the things I want to emphasize is the massive concentration of wealth in the Hellenistic age as opposed to the age of the Greeks. There were rich and poor in classical Greece, but nothing like we're going to see here. Just like fantastic wealth, but concentrated really at the top. Another big thing to occur is really the monetization of the economy. And so what that means essentially is that more and more of the transactions that people were doing were conducted in money. And this is thanks in large part to Alexander. Alexander had gone to the east with a large army. Naturally, this army needs to be paid. And so as he had raided the Persian treasuries, particularly when he got to Persepolis, he had come upon a massive sum of gold, about $4 billion by today's estimates. And a lot of that he had to cut into coin to give to his soldiers. As we all know, soldiers aren't really big savers, and so they had immediately spent that at local markets and so on. And so this money that had been in Darius's personal treasury got out into the economy. And so it's a time where there's a lot of monetization, a lot of money and a lot of coin, and more everyday transactions aren't being done through barter, but they're being done through coin. And this really encourages long-distance trade. Trade routes begin to develop that connect the Greek and Phoenician world of the Western Mediterranean all the way across the Middle East, the Mediterranean, Middle East, and into India and China. So this is really the Silk Road beginning to take shape. Luxury goods, spices, silk, and ivory are going to come pouring in from all around the world. Science, Greek science and art is going to go out to the east, and so it's going to be this incredible cross-fertilization. But again, a lot of this is, this fabulous wealth is concentrated at the top in these Hellenistic kingdoms. Another major development is the rise of some of these cosmopolitan cities. So the polis had been a tight kind of community where people considered themselves almost related to everybody else. They had been places where people would get together and talk politics. They had been places where you knew people from the gymnasium, or you knew people because you fought with them. But the Hellenistic city is very, very different. Some of these new cities are just massive, like Alexandria, which probably reaches around 1 million, but there's also other cities like Antioch and Pergamum. And these become new cultural and economic hubs. Um, the urban population in these places surges, like I said, as many Greeks will migrate to the east. Of course, there's also native populations that are already there. And these cities are very multicultural. So rather than having people that you consider yourself related to, it's now, if you're a Greek, you live with Egyptians, Persians, and Babylonians. Greek is going to become the new lingua franca. And we might remember what that term means. That means it's the kind of the international language. So it displaces Aramaic in many places. If you're going to do government, you're going to do trade, you now do it in Greek. We also see a merging of religious traditions. So one thing that the Greeks are very open to are a lot of these religious traditions that are already well established in these cities that they're moving to. And so the Greeks are very fascinated by this. And especially in the case of royal cities like Alexandria, which is the capital of the Ptolemaic Empire, or Pergamum, which becomes a capital, or Antioch, a lot of these are going to become the places where kings are going to lavish a lot of money on the city. And so this is another major development, is urban wealth and patronage. So like I said, the economy grows, but a lot of it is concentrated around the courts of kings. Now, the term patronage means, in this context, to support artists or arts or science. It's basically financially giving away money to things that you value. All right. So, I mean, you might know the app Patreon, right? You become a patron in a small way if you use that app, right? Of, the podcast or whoever you like. So, this marks a big transformation again. During the time of the city-states, it had been the citizens. Remember, if you think back to our lecture on Athens, it had been the citizens who had patronized artists. And what were the artists making? Well, they were making things that celebrated the citizen. But now, if we have kings or wealthy private elites doing it, they are going to patronize things that they believe in. And that's not citizens, right? It's not celebrating citizens. And so these people do fund a lot of great things, though. They do fund the sciences. You may be familiar with the Library at Alexandria, right? That's the Ptolemies that fund that because they believe in it. They are going to fund great art, but it's going to be art that celebrates kings or elite culture and not so much that celebrates the citizen or the citizen soldier or anything like that. And same goes for literature. And so we see less polis-oriented art in this time, less festivals being held, less building of temples, and more libraries, private art collections, and the like. Now, it's important also to look at identity. All right. So identity becomes a big and kind of fluid thing in the Hellenistic Age. First of all, we should talk about societal transformations. All right. If you can imagine what the hierarchy looks like, usually as a pyramid, we would see that get much sharper and taller, right? So the pyramid would get much sharper and taller. Society would be much more stratified. and concentrate with wealth and power at the top, as I've said. Trade and urbanization is only going to add to that. And so people who live in one of these major power centers are going to tend to be doing better off. And it's going to be a world of difference between life in some of these major cities and the outside world. A world of difference between Alexandria and the way people in Alexandria live compared to the Egyptian peasant who maybe just lives 10 miles outside the city. They still live in their old world, where in Alexandria, it's gonna be a world dominated by Greeks. And so it's important to talk about identity, because I say a world dominated by Greeks, but I don't mean necessarily that these are people who came from Greece, or maybe even whose ancestors came from Greece. The idea of Greek, the idea of being a Hellene, as I said, this is their word for Greek, becomes kind of fluid. In other words, to be a Greek, to Hellenize, means to adopt the Greek language. It means to adopt Greek customs and Greek cultural identity markers. For instance, do you speak Greek? Obviously, is one of the big determiners. But do you know about Greek literature? Do you know about Greek philosophy? Do you know about the Greek arts? And these are all accessible to people as long as you have the means to be educated. And so it's very much open. Many elites are actually ethnically Egyptian or ethnically Babylonian, but they adopt this Greek culture. They become Greek in a sense. And so this world is a very cosmopolitan world. And this is a term that dates back to this period. It's an important term. Cosmos means world, or, you know, we would use it as universe. It means like world. In polis, the other root of this means citizen. All right. So being a citizen of the world, in other words, what your ancestry, what your ethnicity, doesn't really matter anymore. It's, have you adopted this new international culture that is beginning to form? And so for many of these elites, they see themselves as part of this vast empire of the world, this worldwide view, which is a world of difference away from the way an Athenian would see himself just a century or two earlier, right? Their polis, they were citizens not of the world, they were citizens of Athens, and your whole world was Athens or Sparta or wherever you happen to be. And so this is a complete change in worldview. So while this world was more cosmopolitan and more elite and intellectual in many ways, it was also a world where there was less civic engagement. It was a world where people had more, but where they lacked the community and they lacked the sense of belonging that the city-state could offer. We see an increasing inward focus as people become more and more concerned with their own personal well-being, and they lose some of their community mindedness. And so this is often associated, comes across in the literature as an age of anxiety, an age of social anxiety, an age of uneasiness in a way that we don't really see in the classical period. And so in response to this, we're going to see people become more interested in Eastern religion, which seems to provide security in an uncertain world. And also we're going to see philosophy rise to the challenge to try to provide answers to some of the intellectual turmoil that people are experiencing. And so oftentimes these philosophies have been branded by moderns as self-help type philosophies. And so in this section, I want to really hone in on some of these intellectual and artistic traditions that develop during the Hellenistic period. And I want to start with science and technology because this is an area where the Hellenistic era really shines. Um, Particularly in Alexandria under the Ptolemies, there's an incredible amount of royal patronage that goes into supporting science and technology. Vast amounts of money are spent on this. And so this really fuels change along with increased travel and trade. So the Greek knowledge base obviously expands greatly as they come into contact with Babylonians and Persians and Egyptians and even Indians. And so they get some of this knowledge that's brought into the store house of knowledge that they have. And there's a lot of cultural exchange. A few key figures emerged during this time. People who specialize in engineering and mechanics, people like Archimedes, who you may have heard of. And Archimedes, of course, is going to build all sorts of war machines. He's going to build all sorts of engineering marvels like pumps and whatnot. He's going to use mathematics to solve problems. There's some big names in geography and astronomy also begin to develop. And so again, people have traveled more, there's more world knowledge. And so one of the really great thinkers of the Hellenistic Age is a man by the name of Eratosthenes. And what Eratosthenes is going to do is he's going to figure out the circumference of the Earth, and he gets it to within like something like 200 miles. And he's able to do this. He doesn't obviously go around the world, but he's able to do this by measuring shadows and then applying a mathematical formula and figuring out the circumference of the Earth. That's incredibly accurate. Another name that becomes really important, especially in the Middle Ages, is Ptolemy. And so he's going to combine Greek and Egyptian science together, and he's going to formulate what becomes the geocentric model of the universe. And then there's big names in medicine and anatomy. All right, so Greek medicine really comes into its own at this period of time. The Alexandrian Medical School is able to devise and uncover many of the mysteries of the human body. Now, as I've mentioned several times, philosophy is an area that's incredibly fruitful during this particular period. We see the decline in the polis, and really classical philosophy of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle had really been focused around the polis. It had been polis-centric, if you will. And this obviously isn't a major pressing concern during the Hellenistic Age. If people aren't citizens, there really isn't any worth to talking about what the ideal citizen would be like or what the ideal form of government would be like. There just isn't, that isn't a concern, right? Monarchy is the form of government, and that's it. And we also know the decline of the polis brings less civic engagement. And this really begins to affect people's personal well-being. And so a few major philosophies emerged during this time with answers. Some of them you may actually know. So one of the philosophies that emerges is cynicism. And this is pioneered by a guy by the name of Diogenes. And basically what Diogenes does is he creates almost like a hippie-like philosophy where he completely rejects the idea of wealth, power, and status. And he lives a life of basically begging and of not participating in society. So that's his answer, is to just reject all the societal norms. Some cynics walked around nude. Many lived just outside a meager existence, and really promoting this idea of radical self-sufficiency, so complete rejection. Another major philosophy to emerge is Epicureanism, named after its founder, Epicurus. And this philosophy really tries to seek inner peace. Epicurus has a lot to say, but essentially the core focus is happiness through moderation. Don't get too involved in politics. Don't get too involved in anything. Withdraw as much as you can. Focus on your private life. Get a few close friends and live a life of moderation. In the last one, I'm confident a lot of people have heard of, and this is Stoicism, which was pioneered by a guy by the name of Zeno. And really, what Stoicism focuses on is that you should embrace your fate, you should embrace your duty, and focus on self-discipline, focus on rationality. Don't let your emotions get the better of you, but stay firmly in control of them, and focus on your role in life. And so, again, this is a brief thumbnail sketch of these. There's a lot more that could be said of it that we don't have time to get into. And so, whereas philosophy may have appealed to intellectuals, maybe people higher up on the social spectrum, for most people, religion continued to provide answers. But even religion had changed to a large degree. With the decline of the polis came a decline in the polis-centered religion, as shown on the left here. So this is I believe, the Pan-Athenaea Festival in Athens. It was a yearly festival where the entire town would come out. And so religion in the polis was a community-oriented thing. The entire community came out. It was a very public sort of thing. It was part of being a citizen, almost like a birthright to become a member of that particular religion that's associated with your polis. With the decline of the polis, though, comes the decline in this type of religion. And we start to see a movement toward what are called mystery religions or mystery cults. And that's shown here on the left. This is the cult of Isis, which has Egyptian roots to it. And mystery religions were very different. Unlike the polis ritual, which was something A, that you were born into, B, that was very public, C, wasn't particularly spiritual, right? Polis rituals were kind of gigantic parties with religion thrown in. But the mystery religion is going to be personal. It's going to be something you choose to join. You're not born into it. It's going to be smaller, community-oriented. And it's going to often be salvific. In other words, it's going to offer salvation of some sort. The possibility of getting so close to the God that you are going to have you're going to be saved by the God and brought to a happier place. And so the traditional Greek view of the underworld had been pretty similar to the Mesopotamian view, where it's a gloomy, dark underworld. But for many, like we know, like the Egyptians, for instance, have this worldview that the afterlife can be a place of an incredible place of happiness. And so we see a lot of these ideas begin to percolate into the Greek mind and become incredibly popular, joining a mystery cult. And many of these are Eastern in origin, though not all of them. There are a couple of native Greek mystery cults. Another major theme is the idea of syncretism. All right. And syncretism is when you blend two gods together. So we can see this here. This is Zeus Ammon on the left. What is Zeus Ammon? Well, it's just a hybridization of the Greek god Zeus and the Egyptian god Ammon, both powerful sky deities. And there's a lot of cases of this where we, in polytheism, the gods are often associated with nature in some way. And so as the Greeks interact more with Easterners, they say, oh, well, you've got an Earth Mother goddess, we've got an Earth Mother goddess, you've got a sky goddess. And so we see a blending of their personas, so to speak. And we see an incredible interest in these Eastern religions, which are often older and more well-developed than the Greek. Also, Eastern ideas like astrology and fate start to come into the Western mind. Lastly, it bears mentioning is the idea of ruler cult. This idea of king worship that had been so prominent in the East. Hellenistic monarchs like this. They can use it to reinforce their own monarchy. And so again, we see this blending of religious and political ideas in the Hellenistic Age. Finally, I want to just briefly talk about changes in art. The figure on the left is a classical artistic depiction, a depiction from the Classical Age. Classical Age is going to really prize serenity. You can see that the girl doesn't have very much emotion, deep in thought, not particularly doing very much. And this is very typical of the Classical Age, this a kind of serene, sort of not bothered look to it. We compare this with Laocoon over here on the right, and this is a really great example of Hellenistic statuary. All right, so the Hellenistic world is big, it's bold, it's dramatic, it's emotional, hyper-realistic. In other words, the looks like a real human being, although I have to admit I'm kind of envious of his musculature, but hyper-realistic nonetheless. In Hellenistic art, the artist is going for expression, suffering, struggle, human vulnerability. These are all ideas that the Hellenistic artist is trying to convey. And perhaps, and likely, this is a reflection of the uncertainty of the age. All right? And so I guess it goes back to that old question, does life influence art or does art influence life? And probably both in this particular case. Another big thing that we are going to look at is shifts in monumental architecture. City-states could do amazing things, but nothing like the resources of a king. And so kings, obviously, their primary focus is on themselves, their power, their lineage. And so the primary focus of this new monumental architecture isn't going to be the people or the city or anything like this, but it's going to be funding royal palaces, royal libraries, royal temples, displays of power, prestige, bigger, bolder, oftentimes blending Egyptian with Persian with Greek, okay? And so this is some of the developments we see in the arts. Okay, so wrapping things up, we see a world that's really been transformed. We see Greek as the new lingua franca that's out there, this new international language of government, of trade, of scholarship across the Mediterranean and the Near East. This is going to allow philosophical, scientific, and religious traditions to spread across this vast world. And we've seen how Greek itself becomes its own sort of identity, not necessarily tied to being a Greek ethnically, but being Greek culturally. Looking ahead, we're going to see the rise of a new power. And we're going to turn to this new power. This new power that's going to emerge in the West. And we're going to see that in many ways, Rome is going to harken back to the days of the citizen soldiers, but it's going to put a new twist on it. It's going to have a tradition of self-government, and so in this way it'll be a throwback. But it's going to merge these with an expansionistic, imperialistic outlook, and it's going to quickly spread across Italy and into the Mediterranean. But as it expands into the Mediterranean and interacts with Greece and conquers the Greeks, Greek philosophy, Greek science, and Greek art and Greek culture are in turn going to conquer Rome. And so that you may have experienced this before, you can't really tell, is this a Greek work of art or is this a Roman work of art? Greek tutors, Greek architects, Greek thinkers are going to make their way into Rome, and they're going to remake Rome itself. Meanwhile, in the Eastern Mediterranean, in an obscure part of the Seleucid Empire, Jewish scholars are going to begin to apply Greek philosophical ideas to ancient texts. They're going to create a new synthesis that is going to help lay the groundwork for early Christianity. And so this and much more coming up in our next couple of lectures. But this will conclude our lecture on the Hellenistic Age, the Hellenistic world, and when we come back next time, we will start looking at Rome, so stay tuned.